You're on.
I would like to start my speech, The Yukon in Her Eyes, by saying the subject may not be of interest to you, but I believe it's important that people are aware. If you ask me why I picked to talk about this, I would say that there are only so many opportunities in life to let other people know that everyone doesn't grow up in the perfect life. Yukon Territory, Canada, the last of the wild frontier, so I thought I would write about it for my speech. With the raise of hands, who has been to the Yukon? Anybody? Okay. I thought I would start by telling you a little about the Yukon, and then I will talk about one girl's experience with the Yukon government. There are currently 19 towns, and the Yukon is a huge tourist attraction. If you're heading towards Carmax, there is a small restaurant in Braeburn located on the side of the highway in the middle of nowhere. Braeburn is famous for their huge cinnamon buns. If you drive all the way up this road and turn left, you will find yourself in a place called Dawson City. Dawson City is not a city at all, but it is one of the 2 towns in the Yukon that has more than one store. Whitehorse is the other one. Dawson City is known for its mini casino called Gertie's. Now, if you turn right instead, you will find yourself in a small town called Mayo. Mayo is known as the heart of the Yukon because obviously it's in the center of the Yukon. To name a few of the attractions in the Yukon, first, there is the Yukon Saturday Rendezvous, which is held in Whitehorse every year around March. The rendezvous symbol is can-can dancers. Some of the events that take place are fiddling, an air show, fireworks, curling, an axe throw, a log toss, snow sculpture carving, kids games, a hockey tournament, and flower packing competitions. During Rendezvous, among all the events and people, there are the Keystone Cops. The Keystone Cops are there if you want to get someone arrested for fun. All you have to do is pay them a little money. The other main event that is held in the Yukon every winter is the Yukon Quest. The Yukon Quest is a 1,000-mile dog sled race and is the most popular race and biggest race in the world. The race starts in Whitehorse and runs all the way to Fairbanks, Alaska. Among the neat events and things that are in the Yukon, there are many people who suffer from drug addictions, alcohol, and abuse. Sexual abuse is very common in the Yukon, and it is still unclear to me why the government isn't doing anything about it. I think that it's important that one girl's story is heard. Sam. Sam left the Yukon 7 years ago, and last week was her first time back since then. Wednesday, April 15th, she set out on her trek to relive and visit her past, her history, her family, a new beginning during the blessed time of Easter. How appropriate, she thought. Well, as God would have it for her plans, they were changed. Her friend Lana picked her up at the airport in Whitehorse, as planned, and they stayed a night at her and her husband Ken's house. The next day, her mom picked her up and her son. They met at McDonald's, where they exchanged their luggage and said their goodbyes to Lana. They set out for their 2-hour trip to Carmax, a small community of about 400 people. Upon settling there and settling in, their hopes were shattered. Going back to her mom and family was not the same. Within hours, she knew that that was not where she wanted to be with her son. As a safety plan previously made with Lana and Ken, she was to call them should things not work out. True enough, she called Lana and she drove to get them on Sunday morning. Now let me tell you about Lana. She was a youth worker Sam met 9 years ago in Whitehorse. Lana and Sam built a relationship of trust and respect. Through Sam's life of meeting her and her husband Ken, their relationship stayed strong and aged out of the group home. She always stayed connected with them. They had a son of their own, Christopher, who was 22. Tragedy struck the Putnam family, and they lost their son on January 14th, 2011. Ken and Lana are currently making a petition for a better youth services through the government in the Yukon. The Yukon's government has never had a stable program for youth who struggle from addictions. It is sad that it takes a death for people to be aware of this. Through Sam's experience with the Yukon government, she found them to be uninterested in helping the youth, and most of the workers were there only for the money. Although things between Sam's family and her did not work out when she was young, Sam began her journey under the care of the government at age 13. When Sam first went into care, she found herself getting involved with the wrong people. She started hanging out with drug users, and even though the staff were aware of this, they never said anything or did anything about it. Sam was never adopted, so she was moved into a permanent group home. Sam's life began to fall apart, and she was introduced to hard drugs from a friend's father. She started using drugs every day, all day. She eventually got sick from the drugs, and the group home finally sent her to a hospital in BC to regain stability. After about 2 months, she was released back into the care of the government. During Sam's stay in the hospital, the doctors forced her to be on medications. Sam argued she didn't need them because all the pills made her want to do was sleep and eat. But her say had no authority over her own life. She began to pretend to take the pills, and this is how she made it out of the hospital and back to the group home. Without telling Sam, the group home had moved all of her stuff to a new group home, which was now her new home. Once released from the hospital, Sam got right back into drugs, and once again, her life and health went right down the drain. She was stuck in one vicious cycle, which the government preferred to have no role in. This was when they assigned Lana to be her worker. The higher workers always told the staff that they were not to hug the children at the group home, and that is when Lana started an organization of First Nations people, giving the right to freely care about the youth, which suits the Aboriginal traditions. Children in care need to have someone to care for them, and if not, where will they end up? By this time, Sam was heavily involved in drugs and the wrong people. Sam spent her days hanging around killers, drug dealers, and people who didn't care about anybody else except themselves. Life meant pretty much nothing to her. Sam wasn't allowed in any schools, and her life of minor crime was breathing down her neck. Lana and Ken asked the government for permission to bring Sam to their house for Christmas, but their request was denied, and instead, Sam spent her Christmas with drug dealers getting high. This is when the workers with higher power called Lana into a meeting. They instructed her not to make a relationship with Sam, not to care for Sam, and to only be there for the job, because by the time Sam was 16, she would be dead. What kind of government says this about somebody? A government should be there to care and support all the youth and children in care, no matter what they have been through, and no matter how they're living their lives. Through the years, Sam's uncontrollable drug use, she suffered the harsh control of the government. The staff never talked to any of the youth who had drug problems, and never offered any emotional support. They never asked the youth why they chose such a devastating path, though most of the youth lived this way because of the abuse in their past. The group home decided to send Sam to a BC treatment center. Once there, Sam would leave to Hastings Street in Vancouver for days on end. Her drug addiction spiraled into a nasty addiction to heroin. There was never anything she wanted more than her next fix. The treatment staff would find her down on Hastings and eventually realize that it wasn't going to stop. They called her and told her caseworker in the Yukon that what was happening, and the next day her worker was on the plane down to Vancouver to pick her up. When she was back at the group home, she was now 18. The staff tried to force her to continue to take the pills, but she finally stood up for herself and said 18 is the legal age to make her own decisions, and if they tried to force her to take the medications, she would get a lawyer and charge them. Sam felt better, free of the government's control over her entire life. The best day of her life finally came when she was allowed to move out of the group home. She no longer had any rules that she was forced to follow, and she was free to do what she wanted, when she wanted. And best of all, she proved the government's word to be wrong. She was still alive. Little did Sam know, her drug problem was spiraling out of control fiercely. Sam OD'd more than 3 times. She lived through the abuse of boyfriends and family. Sam dropped out of school because it was too stressful. But one day, Sam met a certain someone who helped her successfully get the help she needed and left her lifestyle behind. Today, Sam has been clean for 6 years and is more successful than she ever imagined herself. Through all of the mental abuse from the government, she doesn't consider herself as a victim. Sam considers herself an example of someone who survived. She is an individual who has a story of hope to share. She is always trying to be a positive example for people who are forced to go into the care of the government because they have nowhere else to go. Sam is currently writing a book about her life in hopes that it will inspire other people. People need to know what goes on to youth who end up in care. Sam's story is only one of hundreds of people who have survived the government and their abuse, and hopefully it's not the last to be heard. I am Sam, and this is my story of survival.